There is a fourth person who also deserves the Nobel Peace Prize on this Israel-Palestine issue, I believe, is none other than Professor Norman Finkelstein.
I would add them to that list of three that I mentioned, or that you quoted earlier.
Identity politics and the radical politics. And you also recently mentioned about careerism and opportunism.
White Jewish supremacist billionaires who are using their immense financial wealth to try to crush the student demonstrations.
There are these politicians, bureaucrat elites, the higher echelons who are interconnected on the top.
There's never been anything like it. Two Ivy League university presidents were toppled.
UN-backed international troops be successful against a US-backed Israel militarily, Soviets, and the other has been the Muslim civilization.
So that's Brazil. Russia, well, Russia is willing to defy the United States when it comes to Russian interests. Why Germany and not the United States?
Yeah.
2/3 of the housing in Gaza is gone. All the universities of Gaza are gone. That Jerusalem is a critical issue.
Yep.
There is a real possibility that nuclear weapons will come to be used.
Israel is determined with the United States to put the Arabs in their place and to keep them in their place. Now, how can I not respect those who say no to that?
Okay, so it is an extreme privilege and an honor for me to get to speak to one of my childhood academic heroes. And I would first like to introduce you in my own way. And I'll introduce you by using your words. Professor, you said that in this Gaza genocide, there have been three heroes that have emerged. One you said are the Palestinian doctors and the paramedics, and we can add the Palestinian journalists as well, who despite being in the killing field, continued and remained steadfast to saving the lives and speaking out for the Palestinian lives and the Gazan lives. So they deserve a Nobel Peace Prize. Second, you said, are the South Africans who had the courage and the bravery to hold the hand of the biggest criminal in the world and take them to the biggest court of the world, the International Court of Justice, where they officiated the word of genocide against Israel. And also now they have won the case on the settlements as well. So they also deserve a Nobel Peace Prize. Third, you said, are the Houthis, who feeling for the pain of their brothers in Gaza because they went through the blockade, inhumane blockade as well. So they said there will be no business as usual, using your words, there shall be no business as usual until the issue of Palestine is resolved. So they deserve a Nobel Peace Prize. But I'll say to the top of my voice that there is a fourth person. There is a fourth person who also deserves a Nobel Peace Prize. And that person, whenever there are major events in history, like wars or conflicts or genocides, people only look at two things. Number one is who are the opposing groups, and number two, who was on the truth. Who was on the truth, and who was the oppressor and who was the oppressed. And for ascertaining who was on the truth, they always look towards academics and historians. The best academic for the past several decades on this Israel-Palestine issue, I believe, is none other than Professor Norman Finkelstein, and I believe you, sir, deserve a Nobel Peace Prize on this.
Well, thank you for your kind words. Excuse me. When I made that statement, there was not yet another development, which was the student demonstrators. And that began probably, about 3 months ago, the demonstrations. And they too showed really exemplary courage and just sheer human decency. For an American student, now I'm saying strictly for an American student, it was a very high price. Students were expelled. Students were suspended. Students were denied the right to attend their graduations. Students went to jail and accumulated an arrest record. They paid the price, and they were steadfast literally to the last day, till the graduation ceremony. So I would put them in that, I would add them to that list of three that I mentioned, or that you quoted earlier. I would also note, in addition to the doctors in Gaza, was the large number of doctors around the world who volunteered to go to Gaza and risk their lives. At least in the West, a medical doctor is the highest paying profession. And it takes a lot of talent and conscientiousness to achieve the position of a medical doctor. And to risk all of it to go over to Gaza, it's a deeply moving testament to an aspect of humanity that's sometimes forgotten in all the horrors that unfold every day, everywhere.
Yes.
I'm going to just go get a glass of water to clear my
please.
throat.
Yes.
Okay, I'm back.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about these academics. I mean, you have written the book, I'll Burn That Bridge when you've written this book. And you have mentioned about the scholarship corruption and the identity politics and the radical politics. And you also recently mentioned about careerism and opportunism. All these kind of things are now emerging in the academic hemisphere, and we are suffering from this. I myself, in my country, also suffer from this and speak out against this, where there is a culture of show-off education now. And we have recently even seen the ousting of presidents in Harvard, MIT, and Penn. And the respect academics are losing because of this oligarchic capitalist system, oligarchic militant capitalist system, where there are these politicians, bureaucrat elites, the higher echelons, who are interconnected on the top, and they are, controlling these academic institutions to the way they like. And then we have many academics on the seats who culture, like to use the words, who worship money and worship the chairs. They worship the politicians, the chairs as well. So this kind of things that are emerging in the academic institutions, which is weakening our academic institutions. How can we change this? What is the way forward on this?
I think one has to always look at the picture in the whole. It's important not to just look at one side or look at the other side. So in the case of academia, you see two phenomena going on at the same time. On the one hand, there is a handful of white Jewish supremacist billionaires who are using their immense financial wealth to try to crush the student demonstrations on the college campuses. And not just the student demonstrations in the college campuses. They even contacted the mayor of New York and demanded that he crush the demonstrations, or they wouldn't support him in the forthcoming mayoral election. They have huge amounts of money. That's a consequence of the fantastic polarization of wealth in our society, such that for them, $50 million, literally, this is not an exaggeration, $50 million here. William Ackman tells Harvard, I'm going to withhold my $50 million contribution. Another academic tells the University of Pennsylvania, He was a graduate of the Wharton School of Business. He's going to withhold $100 million. Another figure, Sternlicht, he tells Brown University, these are all Ivy League universities, that he's going to withhold a huge sum of money. There's Kraft. He tells Columbia University he's going to withhold a huge sum of money. And so the universities buckle to the pressure. They march to the beat of the Jewish supremacist drum. And it was a very ugly picture. It was the most brutal, vicious, and undisguised assault on academic freedom by a private entity in American history. There has never been anything like it. Two Ivy League university presidents were toppled. The rest were terrified. People like President Shafiq at Columbia, the president of MIT. The MIT president held back. She was actually quite good, but then she buckled to the pressure also. So that was a very ugly phenomenon. But then we have to see the other side, which is, as I said earlier, the students stood their ground and risked quite a lot. In the United States, Columbia University, for example, it costs $80,000 a year. It's not a small sum of money. And students were willing to risk losing all their semester's credit, being suspended, being expelled. So there was, on the one side, the brutal, vicious assaults, and on the other, there was the very heroic, principled, courageous resistance. As to the question what you can do about it, I don't personally believe you can do very much about it. These kinds of tendencies, the succumbing, the giving in to careerism, opportunism, the desire for really in the great scheme of things, it's pretty petty stuff. The desire to be invited to a conference, to attend a wine and cheese party, to get a guest lectureship, pretty small stuff.
Yes.
But in academia, those are big things.
Yes.
Henry Kissinger, the archetypical academic war criminal, he once said, the battles in academia are so vicious because the stakes are so puny. And I think there is some truth to that you really are fighting over nothing. Academics will loathe and hate each other. Yes. Because one forgot or decided not to cite the other in a footnote.
Yes.
A footnote.
I know.
The absence of a footnote citation is enough to... It's the equivalent of dropping an atomic bomb in academic life. It's so stupid.
Yes.
So I think that's kind of built into the system.
Yeah,
you can't do much about it.
Yeah, the politicians and the ones in the higher echelons, they have this oligarchic capitalist mindset, and this gets transformed into the academic institutions as well. And they start, bullying each other and all these kind of things we see happening in the academia. And I often say that, you've written all about how identity politics is a major problem in academia. And I also, say about this, that the biggest problem we are facing in the world is that there is no respect anymore for the criteria for good and bad. I think the one thing that academics can offer to the world, to the politicians, to the higher echelons, is this moral legitimacy that the Western institutions are lacking and the entire world is lacking right now. The moral legitimacy is lacking in this world. We are, the prophets came and all these people came. The only thing they fought was for the criteria for good and bad. And this is like non-existent. We see what Israel is doing, right?
Well, it was very interesting to watch how woke culture, which is basically the liberal academic culture, the universities are mostly, at least in the social studies, I won't speak about the natural sciences. In the social studies, the humanities, as they're called,
Yeah.
they're overwhelmingly woke. And the organs of those institutions in the United States, like the New York Times, the liberal woke New York Times, the liberal woke Atlantic magazine, the liberal woke New Yorker magazine, the liberal woke New York Review of Books. It was very interesting to observe how these woke institutions, which are so anti-racist, they're so anti-racist. It was interesting to watch how they reacted to the events since October 7th. So let's just take one example. As you know, in woke culture, the most sacred figure is the Black woman, because she suffers from what's called a stupid term, intersectional oppression. She's Black and she's a woman, okay? Now, there were 3 prominent victims of the assault on critics of the Israeli genocide, 3 prominent critics who were Black women. Claudine Gay, president of Harvard University, Candace Owens, a right-wing figure, but quite prominent, Black woman. Brianna Joy Gray, Black woman, very impressive Black woman, probably the most impressive of the whole generation of podcasters. Harvard BA, Harvard law degree, very smart woman. Now, all 3 of them were canceled, to use the expression of woke culture. Okay, all 3 were canceled. Was there a hue and cry of outrage in the New York Times, in Atlantic magazine, in New Yorker magazine, in the New York Review of Books? Not a word. Not a word. Because the whole cancel culture is completely fake. It's a ruling elite strategy in order to do 2 things. Number one, well, really one thing, 2 things. Number one, it's to create a new base in the Democratic Party to replace the white working class, which has in large parts defected to the Republican Party. And it does so by trying to create a base among identity groups, women, Black women, gays, lesbians, transgenders, trying to create a base not on class, grounded not in class, but grounded in what are called sexual and racial and ethnic identities. That's its first purpose. Its second purpose is to derail and discredit any working class candidacy by claiming it's insufficiently sensitive to race or to women. And you saw that very clearly with Bernie Sanders, when all the woke people attacked him. First of all, Angela Davis, a hero of woke culture, saying that Bernie was weak, she said, on the Black question. And then they started to accuse Bernie's candidacy of being based on what was called Bernie bros, namely was all white males who supported Bernie Sanders at the expense of poor oppressed white women like Hillary Clinton. So it was very revealing for me to watch how, just like during the Bernie Sanders candidacy, the whole woke culture turned against him.
Yep.
It was also interesting for me to observe how, when Israel perpetrated and continues to perpetrate a genocide, the whole woke culture suddenly fell silent when even Black women, those victims of intersectional oppression, were being one by one canceled.
Yeah. So yeah, no doubt, power abuse. We need to, challenge this, and we have to, change the narrative on this. Moving on to Gaza. Reading from all your works, from Deir Yassin in 1948 to the first Nakba in 1948 to the Six-Day War in 1967 to Sabra and Shatila in 1982 to Second Intifada in 2000 to Lebanon War in 2006, Operation Cast Lead in 2008, Gaza Flotilla Raid in 2010, Operation Pillars of Defense in 2012, eviction in Sheikh Jarrah and Al-Aqsa attack in 2021, and now the genocide in Gaza in 2023. I mean, does Israel want a diplomatic solution? I don't see that. And I've been, promoting this for the past 2 years, that Israel will not take a diplomatic solution to this problem. You cannot think across one-state solution or two-state solution, because until or unless one side is not willing to negotiate, no solution will be possible like this. I think the ultimate solution, and I'll ask you this question, the example I give is like an extreme bully who is continuously attacking a frail person, and the world is saying, hey, stop, please stop, but he's not stopping. Now, the only way to control this extreme bully is to use force, another bigger force against him. So that will, I think, tilt the pressure against the US-backed Israel to a diplomatic solution. This is my thesis to all of this. So the question is, can a UN-backed military force or a UN-backed international troops be successful against a US-backed Israel militarily to tilt them towards a diplomatic solution?
Anything is possible in theory. The question is whether it's a realistic political possibility. In my opinion, the answer is no, because there's no question that the world is changing in terms of the distribution of power on the global stage. But that change has not yet been of a sufficient enough magnitude that a majority of countries in the world are willing to defy the United States. Certainly, you can't find that willingness of defiance in Europe. That's not a possibility. But even if you set aside you set aside Europe, there's a certain degree of defiance by some countries like South Africa. But in general, one has to be sober about these things, you would have to think very hard to come up with even 5 countries in the world that would defy the United States. And the United States, of course, would oppose any UN force entering into the Israel-Palestine conflict. Military force, that's not going to happen. Even, for example, during the ongoing proceedings at the International Court of Justice, the ongoing proceedings on the genocide case, after South Africa filed its application, Nicaragua filed an application against Germany. Well, there was something very obvious there that must have occurred to everybody who watched this. Why Germany and not the United States?
Yeah.
You know, Germany's playing a horrible role.
Yep.
Nothing compared to the US. But Nicaragua recognized you can't do that. You can't do it. So there are very, very real limits. What South Africa did was really audacious, I have to say. But I don't think you're going to find, if you take the BRICS, Brazil actually sided with Israel a lot during the last 8 months. If you read the statements, Lula has not been good. I mean, he's made some statements which were good. He did say it was a genocide, yes. But they've also taken stances which have been very bad during the last, since October 7th.
Yeah.
So that's Brazil. Russia, well, Russia is willing to defy the United States when it comes to Russian interests. When it comes to Palestinian interests, very unlikely. So that brings us Britain, Russia, India.
Yeah.
Forget India. India is a mirror image of Israel on the South Asian subcontinent.
Kashmir.
So, yeah. So India's out.
China.
China. China's not bad. But you see, I read every statement by China. They're always reasonable. They're always fair. The Chinese, they are on international affairs. I'm not talking about their own country. In international affairs, they're always principled and reasonable. The thing with China is very confident of its economic power for obvious reasons. So it wants to avoid conflict, military conflict, at all costs, because it knows that in the normal day-to-day routines of life, where it's simply one economic engine versus the other economic engine, they know they'll win.
Yeah.
They're confident. So
yeah,
they avoid war at all cost,
yeah,
at all price, because they believe in the course of the peaceful daily unfolding of economic life, they will prevail, which is true.
Yeah.
Which is obviously true. So they will stand against any military conflict to the extent it's possible to resist it. The United States obviously wants a war with China, but China will make every effort to resist the provocations by the US.
Yeah, isn't it funny? Isn't it funny that the country who started with a communist ideology and a country that started with a liberal ideology, China is more moderate in this world rather than the Americans. Isn't it funny, right? And I would also like to highlight the, we are running out of time, historical and the religious aspect in this entire issue. There have been only 2 civilizations in the past who have, and you know about this, who have actually challenged the Americans. Because if you trace back their ancestry, it goes to the Roman Empire, the Americans, the US government. So they, try to preserve that. And the two civilizations, one are the Russians or the Soviets, and the other has been the Muslim civilization. Only two civilizations that have actually challenged the American empire. So they know about this. The Americans know that Jerusalem, I listened to your last interview and you said the 4 points are very important: borders, settlements, refugees, and Jerusalem. This Jerusalem question, I'm right now will say that is very important question. America thinks that, and the historical narrative suggests whoever controls Jerusalem, it is like he controls all the power, right? This is the historical significance of Jerusalem. All the major wars happened 1,000 years back, if you trace back the history, rich history on Jerusalem. So America thinks that's why they are fighting so much on this Gaza issue and the Palestine issue. They evaded from Iraq, evaded from Afghanistan, but not from Jerusalem, not from Palestine. So this historical and religious narrative, they have this fear. What if the Muslims, recapture us and start subjugating us? They have this element is there in their minds. That's why America is with Israel is fighting so much. And I think you know about this.
I will say I am agnostic on that question.
Okay.
It is not disputable that when you read the record of the diplomatic negotiations in the Israel-Palestine conflict, it cannot be doubted that Jerusalem is a critical issue. No question in my mind about it.
Yeah.
However, I do think there is a question of why Jerusalem is so important in these negotiations. Bear in mind, Israel says we have to have Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the eternal capital. There will never be any, Jerusalem will never again be divided. But bear in mind, from 1947, from 1948, when Israel was founded, to 1967, it didn't have East Jerusalem and nobody particularly cared.
Yep.
It wasn't as if Israel was unthinkable without East Jerusalem. They didn't have it, and they made out just fine. So why it came to loom as such a outsized issue, I'm not sure. I don't have an answer to that. I don't pretend to have an answer.
Okay, so quickly on, I live in Pakistan, and Pakistan is a nuclear powered country as well. What do you expect from countries like Pakistan to say on this issue of Gaza? Should they take a military stance as well? One of our generals, General Rahil Sharif, actually came up with the IMCTC, the Islamic Military Counterterrorism Coalition, in which there were 42 countries. And they tried to somehow unify them to these sort of issues as well. So what do you say for countries like Pakistan, who are nuclear powered countries as well? What stance should they take? But there is also the threat of India attached. Message to Pakistan.
Right now, I don't even see the vague outlines of a resolution of the conflict. Usually, in most conflicts, fairly early on, you begin to discern the essential features of what a settlement would look like. But in the case of the current round with Israel and its neighboring states, I don't see where this can end. Israel is determined to deliver a military defeat to Gaza, to Hamas. That's one of its goals. Its basic goal is to simply make Gaza unlivable, which it's succeeded, in my opinion, in doing. There is no Gaza anymore. There's 40 million tons of rubble. The estimates will be that it'll take 10 to 15 years just to remove the rubble. The rubble is filled with unexploded ordnance. It's filled with toxic chemicals. About 2/3 of the housing in Gaza is gone. All the universities of Gaza are gone. The possibility of rebuilding, I think, is pretty remote. So Israel achieved its overarching objective of making Gaza unlivable. And it still is determined to deliver that military defeat. And then it will move on to Hezbollah in Lebanon, and then maybe to Iran. So I don't see the outlines of any kind of negotiated settlement at this particular moment. And I don't think there will be one for a while.
Yeah, and this meeting is ending. I want you to ask so many other questions, like on the nuclear deterrence. Will Israel go as far as, even launching nuclear weapons? Because America speaks so much about Iran having this threat of having nuclear weapons, but it is USA and Israel who the world actually has the threat of on the nuclear weapon question, right?
Well, we don't know where the escalation is going to go with Hezbollah, but there is a very real possibility in the course of this escalation, this uncontrolled, spiraling up escalation. There is a real possibility that nuclear weapons will come to be used.
Yeah. I often say that, we need to, target people like William J. Burns, Randy George, Stoltenberg, Roland Walker, Olaf Scholz, Herzi Halevi, all these kind of military elites as well. Until or unless we don't, get that fear into their head that of the nuclear deterrence that, hey, you are not as safe as you think you are, because we will challenge you on that. I take the narrative. Lastly, I like to say that you have been my childhood academic hero. My earliest memory was in an Arrival documentary, and I would like to share you. And would you like to, see that with me? You gave a prediction about this, and that came true. I would like to share that. Can you see it?
Okay.
This is my earliest memory of you when I was 15 years old.
It could not have been avoided. There is no way that the United States and Israel are going to tolerate any resistance in the Arab world. You want to pretend it can be avoided, you can play that game. But serious people, clear-headed people, knew there was going to be a war sooner or later. You think there's not going to be another war? You think Israel is going to allow that defeat in July 2006? No, there will be another war, and the destruction will probably be 10 times worse, because Israel is determined with the United States to put the Arabs in their place and to keep them in their place. Now, how can I not respect those who say no to that? Israel has to suffer a defeat.
I mean, it is unbelievable. It has been extremely an honor for me talking to this academic hero, Professor Norman Gary Finkelstein. And I was, in the end, was about to say that, isn't it amazing that all the players are still alive? Professor Norman Finkelstein, Hassan Nasrallah, Ayatollah Khomeini, even on the side of the enemies, right? Netanyahu, all these players are still alive. Indeed, we are living in interesting times. And I do believe a military stance can be taken by unifying support from Russia and China and the neighboring Arab countries. I think Israel may tilt towards a diplomatic solution. The world has to remain strong and steadfast. Injustice at one place is threat to justice every place. Another thing I wanted to tell was that I'm actually writing a paper on Professor Norman Finkelstein's academic struggle for truth and justice for the cause of Palestine, a case for Nobel Peace Prize. Do check out all of his books, especially Gaza and Inquest into Its Martyrdom. This time we went too far. Image and reality of the Israel-Palestine conflict. Method and madness, the hidden story of Israel's assaults on Gaza. I'll burn that bridge when I get to it. Heretical thoughts on identity politics, cancel culture, and academic freedom, and beyond Chutzpah on the misuse of anti-Semitism and the abuse of history. Check out all these books. Amazing work by Professor Norman Finkelstein, this academic hero. These are the people who are the heroes of this time, and we need to respect these people and we need to elevate these people. With that, Assalamu alaikum.